I think we're about ready to get started. Welcome to everyone to the Copyright Public Modernization Committee and our first public meeting. I'm David Brunton and I'll be your moderator. I mentioned this a moment ago, but the CIO and the Register will be providing opening remarks. I want to recall to everyone that this session is being recorded. It'll be posted on our website later, and this will be the primary record of our activity today. Library of Congress Chief Information Officer Bud Barton will be speaking first, and he'll hand the mic directly to the Register of Copyrights and Director of the U.S. Copyright Office, my boss, Sara Garski. Bud, with that, please take it away.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you to this first meeting of the Copyright Public Modernization Committee. Ensuring that the Copyright Office has a state-of-the-art IT system is a top priority for the library. And I'm hopeful that this committee will help ensure close engagement with the many copyright community stakeholders who share an interest in our success. Building complex IT systems isn't new for the library. We've been developing complex systems for over two decades, constantly striving to adapt the latest technologies and best practices. And we will be using that expertise as we develop what's come to be known as the enterprise copyright system. Ultimately, however, we know that the test of an IT system isn't how well it's coded or how pretty it looks. It's how well the system meets the needs of its users. That's why we've built this effort around an extensive user experience design program, testing and gathering feedback on every step of the copyright process to ensure we know what users need in a copyright system and what we develop meets those needs in an intuitive way. To me, this committee is also another part of our user design effort. You were selected to join us because of your expertise, your experience, your ability to represent a diverse spectrum of copyright stakeholders, and it's my hope that you will share your informed perspectives on how the new enterprise copyright system will be used and what we should be thinking about from an IT perspective as we continue to mature it in the years ahead. Today's meeting will focus on technology and how we can harness it most effectively for the Copyright Office and for you. This venue is not appropriate to address questions regarding copyright policy or copyright law. Now, before I hand this over to Register Perlmutter, I'd like to add a personal note. As some of you already know, I will be retiring as the CIO of the library in September. But rest assured that I'm leaving this effort in good hands. My deputy, Judith Conklin, has been named the next CIO. I have great confidence in Judith and every member of this team. With your support and input, we will deliver a modern suite of applications worthy of the stakeholders of the U.S. copyright system. I'll now pass over to Sara for a few words.
Thanks, Bud. Let me add my welcome to everyone joining this event, the new Copyright Public Modernization Committee, the staff from the Library of Congress's Office of the Chief Information Officer, my colleagues at the U.S. Copyright Office, and of course, members of the public. Today gives us an opportunity both to provide information and to benefit from the insights of the CPMC members. They have all been selected from a truly impressive group of applicants by the Librarian of Congress, and we're delighted that they're willing to contribute their time and expertise. Public input has been and continues to be a key part of copyright modernization. As our various projects for the technology used in our services have moved forward, we've heard from the public in a variety of ways. One of the most valuable has been direct feedback from those engaging with our newly released pilots, which has been instrumental in our ongoing design and engineering decisions. This includes the Copyright Public Records System, launched at the end of 2020 and currently available on our website at copyright.gov. In the area of recordation, several waves of participants have provided extensive input on the new recordation pilot. As to registration, a group of early users has helped test a clickable prototype of our standard application. And as we continue work on improvements in all of these areas, we've requested public comments through notices of inquiry and rulemakings. The Copyright Office also hosts bi-monthly public webinars where we share updates on all of our modernization projects. And last July, we held a public forum with OCIO on this topic. I encourage everyone to visit the Copyright Office website, which has a wealth of materials, such as documents and fact sheets and recordings of those webinars. And please do continue providing feedback through all available channels to help us develop the most successful products possible. Finally, I'd like to put these initiatives into a broader context. All of this work on modernization contributes to two of the Copyright Office's overarching strategic goals. First, we intend to keep pace with changing technology, not just today, but into the future, continuously refining our services without waiting for them to become out of date. Second, we want to open the copyright system up further to all members of the public, including currently underserved communities, which includes making office services as accessible and as user-friendly as possible. The way we design our technology can play a major role in this effort, as you'll see, for example, from the registration clickable prototype, which requires far less expertise to use than our current applications. In today's meetings, we'll begin with presentations from project leaders to provide an overview of our recent progress on our current approach to modernization. After that, members of the CPMC will each provide brief opening remarks, followed by a moderated panel discussion, and we'll take questions and give answers from the public at the end. I'm very much looking forward to hearing the comments and all of the discussion. So thank you, and I'll hand the virtual mic back to our moderator, David Brunton.
Thank you, Sara, and thank you, Mr. Barton. Hopefully all of the logistics are reasonably clear to everyone at this point. A final logistical point that I would like to make is that as the moderator, I reserve the right to call an audible during this 3-hour-long session, either for the purpose of giving committee members and staff a breather or for giving us additional time if specific topics seem to warrant it. CPMC members, please feel free to drop any questions or comments into the chat. Our next two speakers are Natalie Buddha-Smith, the head of user experience and design at the Library of Congress, and Sara Garski, who is our product manager for the Enterprise Copyright System, or ECS, in the US Copyright Office. You'll hear a little bit from Sara about how the business prioritizes our needs. The product manager is the person from the business with day-to-day responsibility for managing the feature pipeline. And you'll hear more from Natalie about how OCIO and the Copyright Office work together to keep those decisions centered on our users. One additional point I did want to make is that it's absolutely fine for members of the public, participants in the webinar, to put questions into the Q&A, but we're not going to be taking questions throughout the session. That we'll be fielding those sort of toward the end of the agenda. With that, Sara, will you take us away?
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I am going to share a bit about our vision and goals for the ECS, the Enterprise Copyright System. And in a few minutes, I'll dive a little deeper into our ECS development journey thus far. Next slide, please. In the envisioned ECS, all aspects of copyright services and systems are integrated. All users benefit from our responsive, flexible design, our centrally implemented capabilities that are shared across all copyright services that are supported by the ECS, our consistent optimized interface, optimized business processes that are built into the individual components of the ECS as well. We look to our OCIO partners to provide us with the improved technology to provide you with these modernized capabilities. Next slide, please. To reiterate, our end goal is an enterprise system that covers all aspects of copyright services, including the registration, recordation, public record, and licensing areas, providing for a user-friendly, centralized location to file applications and transfers of ownership. Next slide, please. To meet this ambitious goal requires the implementation of several guiding principles, a strong, effective partnership, and constant collaboration between the United States Copyright Office and the Office of the Chief Information Officer, the OCIO. A focus on delivering the quality that exceeds user expectations through a concentration on a user-centered design which ties together people, technology, and business processes, and the implementation of and adherence to industry best practices for software engineering and systems design as implemented through the library's project management lifecycle and systems development lifecycle processes. A focus on agility and the collection of metrics help us enable decision-making. Rigorous testing that is central to our user design strategy, and which also enables us to make quick adjustments based on your feedback. In sum, our user-centered design approach, our focus on agility, feedback, and applying lessons learned all support iterative development and allows us to deploy functionality over time and build towards a fully functional ECS. And with that, I will pass the mic virtually to Natalie Buda-Smith.
Thanks,
Take it away,
Sarah.
Natalie.
Thanks, Sarah. Next slide, please. Copyright modernization has continued to mature and scale and has fully embraced user-centered, agile, cloud-first practices. These flexible, scalable, and resilient approaches allow all that work on copyright modernization to be more efficient and continuously improve the service offerings. Next slide, please. Our multiple teams use online tools to plan, manage, groom, and track user stories, issues, sprints, and releases, all common practices in modern agile design and development. While we have been operating virtually for a while now, we have continued to collaborate and work just as effectively, if not more. Each Scrum team manages their work within a roadmap, communicating across teams and measuring outcomes. At the heart of our collaboration is the daily Scrum, where features are planned and discussed by team members that include business owners, project managers, subject matter experts, user experience designers, developers, DevOps engineers, accessibility specialists, quality assurance testers, and security experts. In this daily Scrum, they discuss ideas and any items that may be holding up work to solve problems. Solving problems and planning work in the daily Scrum are managed in the form of user stories. User stories are very brief descriptions of work to be completed in a defined period of time or a sprint. Multiple user stories are in a sprint and multiple sprints are in a release. A product roadmap is used to plan and communicate the features to be designed and developed in the sprint-based timeline. Building up plans and releases from user stories and sprints allow multiple teams to quickly distribute work to the many individuals in their large teams and quickly shift direction to solve problems, change, and grow. Next slide. Since copyright modernization has several teams working on several services all at the same time, we utilize the Scaled Agile Framework, or SAFe, to manage, communicate, and coordinate the large amount of work that is underway. This SAFe framework breaks down copyright modernization into larger efforts of work called epics, and then those are divided into features. We have also conducted multiple program increment planning events, which is a cadence-based event that serves as a heartbeat of the Agile release train, or ART, aligning all the teams on the ART to a shared roadmap, mission, and vision. Next slide, please. The copyright system is the enterprise copyright system is a complex ecosystem with multiple online services that uses a technical approach that is cloud native. We are developing for the cloud at the start versus moving code into the cloud later. And we use shared microservices. The use of microservices allow us to scale and be more efficient. Microservices are specific business capabilities that can be deployed, integrated, tested, and maintained separately, but can also be used together as a collection of services. Once developed, these services can be used across all of the copyright services. These shared services create consistency, allow for efficiency, and make maintenance easier. An example of a shared microservice is our notification service, which can be seen in registration, recordation, and other services that have similar notification needs. A notification could appear when there is an update on an account, a claim, a correspondence, and more. This notification microservice can be designed and developed as a single shared microservice and then used across the multiple copyright services. So there is an efficiency in the design, development, deployment, and ongoing maintenance of these common features. Next slide, please. Increasing our ability to scale and be more efficient is our design system based on the US Web Design System. Our multiple Scrum teams share the same design system for all copyright modernization, which allows them to build features from shared components that have been already designed, developed, and tested with the same specifications that meet our accessibility standards. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, the enterprise copyright system is a large ecosystem with multiple services and many Scrum teams. Even though there are different features in these services, we are using a singular design system and shared microservices to build consistency between the services where best applied. We are aiming for this consistency in the fields and buttons that you will see in the applications that will operate in the same ways, and with larger features such as login and other account features. This is helpful in two ways. It makes all of these services easier to learn and understand, and it makes this large enterprise copyright system easier to maintain. This consistency also builds trust, familiarity, and ease of use, since users, both the general public and the copyright staff, will know what to expect when they use a system. Next slide, please. User-centered design practices are at the heart of copyright modernization with user research and user experience design. Our teams interact with actual users through all phases, from initial concepts to usability testing and other evaluative methods such as metrics. We show users wireframes and prototypes to get their responses and ask questions about the services as a whole and specific features. We also observe them using parts of a service or an entire application to understand if a feature is working well and working as expected. Our product teams design services for users first, rather than letting the system dictate how the user must use the service. We get feedback from real users with user research and then bring that knowledge back to the Scrum teams throughout the entire life cycle of our work. This allows us to solve problems from a user-centric point of view, and the voice of those that depend on the US Copyright Service can be clearly seen in all the services in copyright modernization. That's the end of my section, and back to Sara Garski, who will give a brief overview of the services.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Now I'd like to share a bit about our development journey thus far, and I will begin with registration development. And if we could have the next slide, great, thank you. We initiated full registration development activities in April of last year. Registration development is a multi-year endeavor. At this stage of development, we are focused on both the external, that is the content creator side, and the internal, those are the examiner functions. A recent project milestone was the completion of version 2 of a clickable prototype. This prototype is being used to support moderated user testing. Notice I said version 2, which means that there was a version 1, and version 2 incorporated feedback from a round of moderated user testing that was completed earlier this calendar year on version 1. This is one example of our iterative approach to ECS development in action. If I could have the next slide. I'll talk about recordation. Some of you may be participants in the recordation public pilot, which was released in April of last year. Since April of 2020, we have recorded more than 2,600 documents. We currently have over 90 individuals participating in the pilot, and we hold regular webinars to address user questions and provide feedback to the development team on the pilot usage. If you are interested in participating in the recordation pilot, we'd love to talk to you. And please reach out to recordation-pilot@copyright.gov. We continue to iterate on, next slide, please. Thank you. We continue to iterate on the pilot to implement additional features and are in the early stages of development for notices of termination workflow functionality. Next slide, please. Next, I'll talk about licensing development. Licensing development was initiated earlier this calendar year. The focus is on workflows needed by staff to examine and verify statement of account submissions. And we are currently working on features needed to support the manual uploading of Microsoft Excel formatted statement of account forms, creating wireframes, gathering requirements, and identifying current processes. Next slide, please. And finally, the public record system. Development began in September of 2019 and is multi-year. In December of last year, we released a live public pilot. Release 2 is anticipated to be released late this summer, and it will include additional features, including recent records and recent searches functionality, the ability to download records, and some usability improvements. I believe this to be the most important systems development endeavor at the most important time for the Copyright Office. As we progress down our development path, my conviction that this is true only becomes stronger, and my excitement and anticipation only increases with each incremental release and significant development milestone. And with that, I will turn this back to David. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie and Sarah. What an exciting time to be at the Copyright Office with these changes underway. So with the context set by the CIO and the Register, and with those additional details provided by our product manager and the library's head of user experience and design, we're going to transition a little bit and talk to our panelists for their initial input on this, our inaugural meeting of the Copyright Public Modernization Committee. I'd like to remind CPMC members, we are right now running sort of exactly on time, and I have a mute button and I'm not going to be afraid to use it today. In order to keep inside of our 3-hour time window for this event, we really need these initial remarks to be limited to no more than 5 minutes and focused on the agency's IT modernization. I'm going to be taking notes of specific events raised during people's opening remarks to spur our conversation and the subsequent panel discussion. And panelists will be called on alphabetically by last name. I'll only be stating your name and your organizational affiliation, no extensive biography, but it is my hope that in this inaugural session, as we're all getting to know each other a little bit more, that we'll hear a little bit more about you as you give your opening remarks. So please feel free to include your own reasons for interest in the committee. Lastly, if there are any technical difficulties with the panelists' cameras or microphones or internet connection, we'll just move on to the subsequent name and push that person to the end of the list and revisit them. So with that, I'd like to introduce Todd Carpenter of the National Information Standards Organization. Todd, feel free to turn on your mic and your camera.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Todd Carpenter. I am the Executive Director of NISO, the National Information Standards Organization. We are a nonprofit organization comprised of approximately 300 institutions, companies, associations, libraries, that serve the entire information media and library communities. We were founded in 1939, and our mission is to build knowledge, foster discussions, and advance authoritative standards development through collaboration amongst scholarly, scientific, and professional communities. We're an ANSI accredited standards developer. We develop standards for publishers, libraries, and software providers. Some of the things that we develop, standards for information is not something that rolls off the tongue for most people. Some of the things that we are responsible for creating and managing that you probably have run into in your day-to-day lives, the barcodes on the back of books, ISBN numbers. For those of you who remember card catalogs in libraries, those cards were a representation of NISO standards, the MARC records. We develop a variety of identifier, metadata, circulation standards for library systems, et cetera. And we've spent the last two decades as an organization moving us from a physical-based world to a digital-based world, which involves a transition of a lot of the standards for creating content, for distributing content, and managing content. Internationally, we also work internationally with outside of the United States within ISO, the international standards body, in the areas of information and documentation, as well as document file formats. Within that community, I also serve as the committee manager for the International Subcommittee on Identification and Description. So this is where all of the identifier standards and some of the metadata standards related to cultural content exist. So ISBN for books, ISSN for serials, ISRC, the International Standard Recording Code for musical works, ISAN for audiovisual works, and DOI for digital object identifiers for digital content. Prior to joining NISO, I spent about 15 years working in the publishing industry in a variety of marketing and business related aspects of primarily online journal publishers. Personally, I am a content creator. I'm the author of 2 books, one forthcoming. Fingers crossed, as every author, it's almost done, it's almost done. I have written many dozens of articles focused on technology and libraries. I'm also an avid photographer. I was an inaugural member of the American Library Association Policy Corps and have served for 10 years as a director of the board of the Foundation for the Baltimore County Public Library. I am looking forward to participating in this group, learning from all of you, particularly how we manage 1 minute. Excellent, I'm just about done. Particularly how the Copyright Office manages copyright information and how that information is accessible to users, both the public as well as corporate users of this information, and how those systems interact, how data is exchanged with the Copyright Office and extracted from the Copyright Office, and how standards can help facilitate that. So with that, thank you, David, for keeping me on schedule, and looking forward to working with the rest of the committee. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Todd. And in case any of the other panelists didn't see it, as the 1 minute mark passed, I held up a little sticky note on the screen. And even if you can't read it, what it says on it is 1 minute. The next person I'd like to introduce is Wahaj Chaudhry of Amazon.com. Wahaj, if you could turn on your microphone and camera, I'll start your timer.
Thank you, David. And thank you for the opportunity to participate in this forum. My name is Wahaj Chaudhry, and I am a technical product manager at Amazon, working on enabling proactive intellectual property management and protection systems for rights owners. And I have the privilege of leading the product and engineering teams at Amazon that prevent counterfeits and infringement from harming our customers, brands, and selling partners. So Amazon provides tremendous selection, I think, as we all know, convenience and value to consumers, as well as unprecedented opportunities for millions of small and medium-sized businesses. Unfortunately, this also presents an attractive target for criminals and bad actors to attempt to attack our stores and services. This presents a serious risk to our business. If customers do not trust what they purchase through Amazon stores, we know they can and will shop elsewhere. As a result, Amazon invests tremendous resources in preventing IP abuse. The primary challenges that I focus on, including scaling a broad spectrum of IP detection and enforcement technologies that utilize a combination of machine learning and data from IP registries across every country that Amazon sells in, ensuring that we can deliver a trusted experience to customers and stakeholders. This includes working closely with rights owners to create a seamless process of ingesting visual and textual IP data, verifying its authenticity, and creating a robust data infrastructure that will allow us to make precise decisions on billions of product listings, streaming and uploaded visual content, and auditory content. A major bottleneck in this space is the management and protection of copyright assets, namely understanding the nature of the protected asset itself, the claimant's role within Amazon, potential authentic application on commercial goods, as well as the vast network of licensing relationships tied to that asset. This initiative to modernize the Copyright Asset Office is an opportunity to address hurdles faced by all stakeholders in the effort to provide customers with access to legal goods and content. The enhancements to the registration, recordation, and licensing processes will enable a high-fidelity data exchange that will allow us to scale our protections and ensure the accurate usage of copyright assets. This initiative also presents a strong value prop for content creators to enhance their ability to protect themselves. I hope to be able to contribute my experience with the various use cases I see daily with copyright data to ensure that the outcome of the Modernization Initiative can benefit copyright holders for visual, textual, and audio content everywhere. We know this will require continued investments, technological innovation, and above all, collaboration. Amazon will continue to invest in, invent, and improve the tools needed to protect our customers and partners. We welcome the opportunity to work with the library, the Copyright Office, the committee, and all stakeholders to achieve our shared goals. I'm looking forward to adding value through this committee and providing a technical point of view on the needs of stakeholders like Amazon. Thank you.
Wahaj, thank you so much. And I would pass it on to the next person, Susan Chertkov from the Recording Industry Association of America. Susan, please feel free to turn on your microphone and your camera.
I'm on. Can you see and hear me?
We sure can. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Register Perlmutter, Mr. Barton, office staff, fellow committee members. My name is Susan Chertkov, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Legal and Regulatory Affairs at the RIAA, Recording Industry Association of America. I've been with RIAA for over 20 years, which has really allowed me to witness the entire shift from a physical-based industry to a digital-based industry. In my role at RIAA, I'm the person that drafts most of the comments we file with the Copyright Office on various policy issues, which have included a range of modernization-related issues. And as a result, I've been following the modernization issues very closely for many years. I also interface regularly with the Copyright Office on behalf of my members when they have issues or problems. They need someone to help troubleshoot something with the registration process or recordation issues. And so again, I'm fairly deeply involved in the issues of recordation, registration. We are regular users of the public search function, and I also work on licensing issues as well. I view my role here principally to represent the views of content owners and creators and users of the Copyright Office's services and its external facing IT systems. And I hope to act as a liaison between the committee and the user committee or the user community as this process rolls on. It's an honor to be on this committee, and it's a testament to the respect and value that the library and the Copyright Office have earned, that so many people from so many different segments of the creative and digital ecosystem have come together to support this work. And it's really great to see the variety of different viewpoints that are represented on this committee. As our CEO, Mitch Glazer, says that the value of unity, cooperation, and working together, even with segments of the industry or community where we see things differently, is essential. For our part, we see modernizing the Copyright Office's IT capabilities as essential. It's technical, but it's highly important. Copyright rights are embedded in our Constitution. Congress has supported this, including recognizing the importance of supporting music creators and the need for resources to have a well-functioning, efficient, and accessible copyright office. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that copyright industries contribute $1.5 trillion in GDP and create 5.7 million jobs. The music industry alone contributes $170 billion to the economy and 2.7 million jobs. Facilitating registration, recordation, and use of copyrighted works is a core mission of the Copyright Office, and having the right IT infrastructure to serve this mission is essential. As the Copyright Office itself has so aptly said, modernized technology is a cornerstone of a modern copyright system. The recent Supreme Court decision in Fourth Estate versus Wall Street, which held that a copyright infringement suit must wait until a copyright is successfully registered by the Copyright Office, has put a premium on having an IT system that can support a speedy, efficient, and accurate registration process. That is one of the key priorities for RIAA's member companies. The challenge of having a speedy, efficient, and accurate registration process grows more complex as the scale of music continues to grow. By some reports, there's nearly 60,000 songs that are uploaded to music services each day. If all of those songs are registered, that's a high volume just coming in from the music community. And no doubt all the other creative arts are experiencing similar digital booms. The Copyright Office has made tremendous efforts in this regard, but it has been candid about the challenges it has faced. We welcome the expanded visibility into the modernization process that this committee will afford. That's been one of the issues that's percolated around for a while, is the user community wanting more insight into the process. Thank you. I look forward to participating in today's discussion and future discussions of this important committee.
Thank you so much, Susan. Our next member of the Copyright Public Modernization Committee's inaugural meeting will be Brewster Kale of the Internet Archive. Brewster, please feel free to start your camera and your microphone. And Brewster is joining us from an undisclosed Starbucks. And if there's any audio or connection difficulties, we'll revisit.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? So I'm Brewster Kale, the digital librarian and founder of the Internet Archive, a nonprofit library which serves millions of patrons a day through the internet. We provide access to materials, for instance, by trying to make all the references in Wikipedia turn blue, so people that want to go deeper can go deeper, as well as the Wayback Machine. And I really appreciate being invited to be on this committee. The tech makes all sorts of things easy that used to be really hard. Let's take advantage of it. Let's do something really interesting with this committee and with really bringing some new and better services to the internet. The Internet Archive is interested in concretely helping, and I believe has been helping. For instance, let's distribute all the copyright registration information and the renewal records to everybody, not just in that awesome user interface that we've been hearing about, but also in bulk, because there's lots of things that we can do in data mining these materials to make them more useful and integrated into our systems to make them copyright office aware. We can also do something else. We can start to collect materials in digital form, not just the metadata. So the Library of Congress, of course, has huge, awesome collections of physical materials and now more and more digital collections. So if this was part of how the registration system worked, then it would really aid in copyright lookups. You could use the sort of non-consumptive approach to go and do searches to be able to find out what's where. For instance, this could help with music, which there are lots of music, and they're all a lot of songs that kind of name the same thing. So being able to go and do these sorts of searches in new and different ways, as well as going and building the collections of the Library of Congress, is very important. The integration of the Copyright Office with the Library of Congress has been, of course, there for centuries, and I think we can leverage it more and better. The Internet Archive has been involved in several initiatives with Library of Congress and the Copyright Office, and as well as independently, to go and make the copyright registration records available. We've digitized the books, and we've gone and used those to go and effectively search to find the copyright status of thousands of periodicals. So it is possible. The user interface is going to be great, but bulk access is important. We've also experimented with OCRing the cards. So Copyright Office did a test of going and digitizing the cards, but they didn't make them massively publicly available, but a few data sets came out. So we digitized those and OCR'd them and made those available. So I look forward to trying to be helpful in a concrete way, listening to what it is that might be necessary. But I think we need to go beyond the UI, which is very important to do, but bulk access to the data. And I look forward to this, this committee. It's very important and timely. Thank you very much.
Brewster, thank you so much. We've got Roy Kaufman of the Copyright Clearance Center, who's going to give the next remarks. Roy, please feel free to turn on your microphone and your video.
I have, David, so hopefully you can see me.
We sure can. Thank you, sir.
Hello, I'm Roy Kaufman. I just want to begin by thanking the Library of Congress and the Copyright Office, both for convening this group, but more importantly, for engaging in what might feel like the thankless task of Copyright Office modernization. It's very important, and we're really glad you're doing it. For those who don't know me, I'm a lawyer by training. I spent about 17 years working in science publishing before joining Copyright Clearance Center. Like Todd, I'm also a book author and author of other materials. I belong to the Copyright Alliance. I am on the editorial board of a library science journal called UKSG Insights. And I work for the United States government in a very limited capacity as a trade advisor through an International Trade Advisory Committee 13, Intellectual Property. For those who want to know a little bit more about Copyright Clearance Center, we are best known as the US Collective Management Organization for the Licensing of Text. So we license text in K-12, higher ed, and also to more than 35,000 businesses globally. The suppliers of our text, publishers, authors, rights holders, we have more than 12,000 of them participating across various programs. Somewhat less known to people who are less familiar with CCC is that we are a software company. Now, everyone says they're a software company, but we actually develop and create software both for our own use and for that of our clients. Publishers tend to use our software to enable licensing and also to manage the relationships they have with their customers and authors around open access publishing. On the user side, we have a lot of software that enables or supports research, particularly for research intensive corporations, pharma R&D, chemical R&D, food R&D. I mention all of this because, first of all, I don't pretend to speak for anyone but myself and maybe even CCC. I certainly don't speak for the publishing community or for the research community, but we do have insight into their needs, which I'd like to be able to bring into this process. CCC, like the library, uses Agile methodology for the development of our own internal software and when we're creating software on behalf of clients. So we're really glad that that's what's being used. We believe it's fit for purpose. It's a great way of doing it. With respect to what we would like to see, we specifically think there should be user stories, and this is going to pick up with themes I've already heard from some of the other speakers around openness of the records and specifically connecting the records of the Copyright Office with other records that have been developed, community developed records that exist elsewhere. So for example, harking back to Todd, we have lots of standards. There are standard identifiers for different types of works. There are standard identifiers for individuals so that the same song or the same work or the same name doesn't get confused with the same person. And a system, an ECS that brings together all of this community developed material, I think would be a great win for the Copyright Office, great win for copyright, and great win for authors and commerce and users. So what could this be? This could be developing new workflows. I don't think the Copyright Office has to build everything. It has to build an infrastructure where others can build. And so, if you imagine if you have to register a work for an ISWC or an ISBN, maybe through an API call, you can develop registration systems at the same time. We'll increase registrations. Thank you, David. I see that. As Susan said, there's a whole lot of songs coming out every day. Probably not all of those are registered for copyright, but those songs will have a workflow, usually connected with the CMO, acronym, and one of the music collecting societies. And so we see that these things can be done. I don't think they require changes in the law. They don't require changes in copyright policy, and they don't require changes in legal presumptions. So the Copyright Office has certain things it has to do in a certain way. We acknowledge that, but there's more that can be done just to bring value to the ecosystem. And I'll stop talking. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roy. Our next Copyright Public Modernization Committee member is Keith Schmidt of the Copyright Alliance.
All right, well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thrilled, very happy to be on this committee. My name is Keith Schmidt. I'm the CEO of the Copyright Alliance. For those who are unfamiliar with the Copyright Alliance, the Alliance is a nonprofit, nonpartisan public interest and educational organization representing the copyright interests of around 2 million individual creators in over 13,000 organizations in the United States across a spectrum of copyright disciplines. The Copyright Alliance is dedicated to advocating policies that promote and preserve the value of copyright and to protecting the rights of creators and innovators. So not surprisingly, the individual creators and organizations that we represent rely on copyright law and, more importantly for today's meetings, the Copyright Office's services to protect their creativity, to protect their efforts, to protect their investments in the creation and distribution of new copyrighted works for the public to enjoy. I want to begin by thanking the library and the Copyright Office for establishing this committee and for inviting me to be a member. I think everyone on the committee here certainly recognizes that the Copyright Office plays a tremendously important role within the copyright ecosystem. The ability of our nation's individual creators and the businesses that support their work to promptly register and to promptly record copyright interests with the office, and of the public to obtain copyright information that enables them to license copyrighted works, creates new industries and spurs the economy, which in turn advances our global competitiveness. So with many ongoing and rapid changes in the information, entertainment, and technology sectors, which we've seen over the last several years, the Copyright Office has never been more important than it is today in ensuring that copyright owners have access to critical services that support their endeavors. So it should come as no surprise that the Copyright Alliance has long supported modernization of the Copyright Office's IT systems for services such as copyright registration, recordation, and public search functions. Improving IT systems should make registration and recordation easier, while also improving processing times and reducing costs. Will also provide benefits to users of the publicly searchable database and the general public in the form of robust, up-to-date, and searchable ownership and licensing information. We at the Copyright Alliance understand what a massive undertaking this modernization project is. We understand how many moving parts there are and how many different viewpoints and needs the Copyright Office and the OCIO need to take into account to make these systems work effectively. An iterative, agile approach toward development that allows systems to be easily adjusted throughout the project, like the SAFE framework now being utilized by the OCIO, seems like the correct approach so long as it continues to take into account the specific customer needs of the Copyright Office. I look forward to discussing the SAFE framework today in further detail, As a matter of fact, I have quite a few questions about implementation of it by the OCIO myself. Now, as the Copyright Office modernization project moves forward, we hope the Library of Congress, the OCIO, and the U.S. Copyright Office, and others who may be involved in the Copyright Office modernization initiative keep in mind several principles to guide its efforts. First, the characteristics of copyright owners who register and record their works within the Copyright Office vary immensely in the type and number of works they create, register, and record. The frequency of the registrations, the manner in which they register, and the size of the copyright owner, and many, many other variables. It is therefore essential that new systems designed by the OCIO for the Copyright Office be accomplished in a way that is flexible enough to address the different uses and needs of all types of copyright owners and all different types of copyrighted works. Second, technology is not static, nor are our nation's copyright laws. In creating any new system, the OCIO should assume that change is right around the corner. I think and hope that we all recognize and agree that the ECS's new registration recordation system should not just make a digital version of the paper process. It is critical that any new systems created by the OCIO for the Copyright Office be designed in a way that is flexible, that is scalable, and that is adaptable to accommodate the change and future growth that is inevitable. And lastly, given the global and dynamic characteristics of the copyright ecosystem, the modernization project should result in a Copyright Office that is able to offer the systems, tools, and resources that all users of the office's services demand, and that all Copyright Office records and systems be easy to navigate, intuitive, have a consistent interface, employ effective and commercially reasonable security measures, and be fully integrated into comprehensive systems of copyright records. Once again, in closing, I want to thank the library for establishing this committee and holding these meetings. I am hopeful that I and the other committee members, as well as any others in attendance, can learn more about the modernization process through these meetings, including the progress that has been made to date and any obstacles that have been encountered, and to provide any input that we can into the process. I look forward to participating in today's meeting and in future meetings. And the very last thing I want to do is wish Bud the best in his retirement and to congratulate Judith on her recent promotion. Thanks, everybody. I look forward to participating.
Thank you so much, Keith, and thank you for those kind sentiments. Melissa Levine of the University of Michigan Library is our next member to offer opening remarks.
Hi, thank you, David. My name is Melissa Levine, and I'm the director of the Copyright Office at the University of Michigan Library. I want to express my gratitude for the opportunity to serve on this committee. And I look forward to getting to know all of you as we dive into our work. And I'm particularly pleased to be joining you from my actual office on a lovely sunny Ann Arbor day on our campus. I've been at the University of Michigan Library for a little over a decade. Our mission is to support, enhance, and collaborate in the instructional research and service activities of faculty, students, and staff, and contribute to the common good by collecting, organizing, preserving, communicating, sharing, and creating the record of human knowledge. I provide education, information, and policy support to the library and our campus community of students, scholars, faculty, researchers, and more, because copyright touches on almost every aspect of our information ecosystem. As part of the research directors group in our library, I spend much of my time lately on matters of open access, open research, and open scholarship. I also provide policy and planning support to the HathiTrust Digital Library and was recently named to the International Federation of Libraries, or IFLA, Committee on Copyright and Related Matters. I'm also working to establish a program for copyright education to empower our students who are learning to be artists, musicians, writers, and other creatives on our campus. Early in my career, I worked in our national collections. I handled business affairs for the Smithsonian and a number of public-private partnerships, and later worked at the Library of Congress on the American Memory Project, which was the first major digital library initiative for the Library of Congress. This is in the mid-1990s. This gave me key opportunities to learn about the Library of Congress, its collections, digitization technologies affecting all media, and the unique relationship between the Library of Congress and the U.S. Copyright Office. I've relied on the records of the United States Copyright Office, registrations, renewals, transfers, assignments, data in the catalog of copyright entries made available through organizations like Internet Archive and HathiTrust. For my work with educational institutions, libraries, archives, and museums over the years, I've gained a particular applied interest in the importance of public access to Copyright Office information. The emphasis on UX is vital for meaningful access to copyright records, and ensuring a workflow that contemplates support for the collection development by or through the Library of Congress. Confidence in the integrity of copyright information is another area of concern. Thinking about the collections and metadata in creative ways will be of tremendous benefit to our country and globally. Again, I want to express my gratitude to Librarian Hayden and to Register Perlmutter, to the U.S. Copyright Office staff for the transparency of this project and its intentional consideration of the public interest. I thank you for the opportunity to work with all of you on this project. I think you got a couple minutes back, David.
That was impressive. I didn't even have to get out my sticky note. Thank you, Melissa. Our next member to provide opening remarks is Pamela Malpas, the Association of American Literary Agents Copyright Committee co-chair. Pamela, please feel free to turn on your camera and your microphone.
Thank you. I hope I've done so.
We are hearing you great.
Okay, great. Thank you, David. My name is Pamela Malpas. As I've been introduced, I'm with the Association of American Literary Agents. I might be speaking a little less in terms of time than some of the other speakers have. I'm going to focus a little bit more on my background and qualifications for being here than maybe expressing some opinions, although to the extent that I speak on behalf of authors and agents, we're a community that is very excited about the prospect of modern copyright registration systems and improved systems for authors to interact with their copyrights, to both register them and manage them. So I am, as I said, a literary agent. I represent writers of fiction and nonfiction. I've spent 3 decades as a publishing professional working with authors and publishers in formats ranging from print publication, the earliest forms of digital publishing in the days of CD-ROMs, web-based publishing, and in the traditional format of books. For the past 20 years, I've been a literary agent working in print, digital, audio, full range of formats. I'm a member of the Association of American Literary Agents, also of the Authors Guild. I'm active in the book industry study group. I'm also a data and database enthusiast. Copyright is not only the underpinning of my work, securing the monetary value of my clients' work, but an area of focus, as I am a founder and co-chair of the Association of American Literary Agents Copyright Committee. In my early career, I developed digital publishing products that required coordinating software development and editorial processes. As a product manager for development of an online publishing program, I was the conduit between software developers, staff writers, management in the development of publishing systems. The iterative process of building, beta testing, debugging, all of that is very familiar to me. As a rights director at one of America's oldest literary agents, I spearheaded projects involving copyrights for lost works by literary estates, including F. Scott Fitzgerald, J.D. Salinger, and those involved complex management of international copyright harmonization. So I'm familiar with some of the differences in U.S. copyright and foreign understandings of copyright, or they have a different taxonomy that they use, but we can get to that later. Researching copyright registrations and renewals for works is an essential part of managing literary estates in particular. So I've done my fair share of moving around in Copyright Office data systems. I've also managed, built, implemented data and information systems. The transformation of data into information is genuinely fascinating to me. Among the most challenging projects I've confronted in my career was the task of migrating an entirely paper-based office to a digital database. So that process, that painful process, is familiar to me. I have hands-on experience in data normalization, query building, and the processes inherent to information management systems. And what in the publishing business we call rights management, which is creating rights, licensing rights, reverting rights, all of the rest of that, of course, has its foundation in copyright. And the systems that manage copyright records, recordations, registrations, everything else are obviously closely related to the work of authors and agents and publishers. Copyright and information systems are both areas of personal avid interest. And so I really look forward to working with this CPMC. Yeah, I hope my experience working on sort of both sides and on behalf of copyright holders, but also in building both practitioner-oriented and public-facing systems will be helpful to, I really hope to contribute meaningfully to the CPMC. That's it for me.
Thank you so much, Pamela. Our next presenter is Micah May of the Digital Public Library of America. Micah, please feel free to turn on your camera and mic.
I'm here. Thank you, David. So thank you all.
We're hearing you great. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, I'm thrilled and honored to be part of this group. So a little bit about me. I have a law degree from Harvard Law. I thought I was going to be an environmental lawyer until I worked in the industry and then changed my mind and went to McKinsey & Company as a consultant. And from there became director of strategy at the New York Public Library. And since then, I've really enjoyed a wonderful 12 years in library land. While at New York Public Library, I was the first to introduce Agile to the web and NYPL Labs team. So I was thrilled to hear all the great Agile principles and practices that you're rolling out as part of this. I think that's a really good fit and wonderful that those are going to guide this work. I moved to DPLA in 2017, where I am now the director of ebook services. So a little bit about DPLA, the Digital Public Library of America. Our mission is to empower people to learn, grow, and contribute to a diverse and better functioning society by maximizing access to our shared history, culture, and knowledge. And the key phrase there is really maximizing access. And we do that both by providing access directly to end users, but also very much by helping institutions, especially libraries, to make their content more discoverable and accessible online. DPLA was founded in 2013. It came out of a convening, which some of you were part of, at the Berkman Center in 2010. And then there was a long process of community grassroots engagement that led to the actual launch of the organization in 2013. DPLA serves as a bridge between libraries and other cultural institutions and stakeholders of all kinds, really trying to connect people. All of our work and our approach is really guided by three principles. So we focus on proactive collaboration. We really believe that institutions are stronger when we work together. And so we seek out partners in everything we do. And we have partnered with many of the folks on this call to advance projects. We believe equity and inclusion needs to guide everything that we do. So we want to make sure that all of our work contributes to a more equitable society. And we believe in optimism about the potential of technology. We really think that technology can move us forward. And as Brewster said, make things better. And we believe in that transformational potential and want to be part of it. So in terms of why we care about copyright, our chief goal in this is to help libraries maximize access to copyrighted works, out of copyright works, and kind of everything in between. So we believe that ultimately creators and libraries are on the same team, team reading in the case of books, and that we want to maximize win-wins as much as we can between copyright holders and creators and cultural heritage institutions, including libraries, that help provide access for Americans. So in terms of our relevant work, we work directly with publishers to try to create the best possible access for libraries to copyrighted books. We have approaching 1 million titles in the DPLA exchange. where we've been able to negotiate better licensing terms on copyrighted items. We also work on openly licensed materials. So we aggregate the open bookshelf, which is over 10,000 openly licensed books and audiobooks reviewed by our curation core of librarians from across the country. Within the open bookshelf work, we have also done some publishing work ourselves. So we did, for example, ebook version of the Mueller report that won a publishing award because it was the only free, openly accessible, high quality EPUB of that publication. We really believe those kinds of things should be available to everyone in the country. And we've also helped libraries create high quality open copies of ebooks. We also, through the DP.LA network, help cultural heritage institutions provide access to over 44 million items, many of which are openly licensed, some are not. We've recently added a rights facet that helps people determine the rights associated with those works. And we consistently work with libraries to help them innovate and make sure that they can provide the most digital access possible. And I very much agree we need to make sure that the digital context is expanding access, not contracting it. So again, at DPLA, our mission is to maximize access to information for Americans. We want to ensure that in the digital age, we become more, not less accessible, that we maximize the win-wins that we think are very available between rights holders and libraries, and really make sure that this project and the digital context moves access forward and makes access more available. So we want to make sure that copyrights facilitates those win-wins, doesn't unduly restrict it. Thank you all. I'm very excited and honored to be part of this group.
Thank you so much, Micah. Our next panelist, our next member of the Copyright Public Modernization Committee to speak is Jim Neal of Columbia University. Jim, feel free to turn on your microphone and camera.
Good afternoon and good morning to my colleagues on the West Coast. And thanks to the Library of Congress and the Copyright Office for this critically important work and for involving us in this project. My name is Jim Neal. I'm University Librarian Emeritus at Columbia University in New York. And I'm also a Senior Policy Fellow at the American Library Association. What do I bring to the work of the committee? I have served as a library administrator and director for 5 U.S. research universities over nearly 50 years, participating in the technological and digital transformation of these institutions. Over the last 30 years, my responsibilities have expanded to include university-wide computing. At Columbia, I also served as the Vice President for Information Services, leading teams of IT professionals in the areas of network services, administrative systems, security, instructional technologies, research computing, digital systems, and information policy. I've been very active in national and international copyright matters, starting in the late 1980s, focused on copyright policy and reform. This has included testimony before congressional committees, service as an advisor to the US delegation at the 1996 WIPO Diplomatic Conference on Copyright, and service on the Library of Congress 108 study group. I have been very active in these copyright matters, also through the support that my institutions have provided to faculty, students, and researchers in their use of Copyright Office processes and services. And I participated in several large-scale modernization initiatives. The Enterprise Resource Planning, or ERP work at Columbia to implement software and systems to manage all financial and business processes across the entire university. The work at OCLC, where I have served on the board for the last 12 years to modernize the global infrastructure, the systems and applications in support of 10,000 libraries worldwide. And the program at the American Library Association, where I've served on the executive board as the treasurer and as the president to review and replace technologies and modernize and integrate services. What are my particular interests in the modernization program? I have 5 points I'll cite. What are the enterprise characteristics of the project? Software as service, support for all activities, flow of data across all applications, common interface, support for copyright creators, copyright managers, and copyright consumers. Second, is the work responsive to a question, an equation that I often pose? Does quality equal content plus functionality? What are the sources and the flow of data which underpin the system? Is the data mineable, comprehensive, current, accurate, relevant, secure? This is a big data project. Third, what are the plans for user testing, training, accessibility, assessment, organizational and cultural change, both at LC and in the community? All of these are so essential to the success of enterprise systems implementation. Fourth, what are the systems and services? Are they agile? Are they scalable? Are they adaptable? Are they responsive to emerging technologies? I know this is an issue that has been raised, and I think it's critically important. And fifth, how will the system interface with diversity, equity, and inclusion? And how will it interface on a global scale? I hope that my administrative, technology, copyright, and modernization project experience will be helpful to the work of the committee. I look very forward to working with my colleagues at LC, the Copyright Office, and on this committee. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jim. The next member to provide opening remarks will be Kathleen Rodriguez of Warner Media. Kathleen, please feel free to turn on your microphone and your camera.
Good afternoon. I'm so grateful to be here and appreciate the opportunity to be part of this committee. My name is Kathleen Rodriguez, and I am a senior paralegal at Warner Media. I've been with the company, including its predecessor, Time Warner, for a little over 23 years. And in that time, I've been involved in the copyright registration and document recordation process, which has evolved from the days when we were required to submit paper applications and ship boxes of deposit material to the USCO to where we are today, submitting online applications and uploading deposit material using the ECO system. A little bit about our company. Warner Media is a global media and entertainment company that creates and delivers world-class content through some of the most iconic brands in the world, including Cartoon Network, CNN, DC Comics, HBO, TBS, TNT, Warner Brothers, and more. And last year in 2020, we also launched our streaming service, HBO Max. So as a world leader in creating premium content, Warner Media gives protection of our IP the highest priority. So we're looking forward to being part of the USCO's latest modernization efforts. And in particular, we look forward to balancing efficiency of process with the need to protect deposit materials from piracy. So I am one of a team of 5 who register and record all copyrights for the collective Warner Media companies, making us a high volume user of the USCO's services. On average, we file, I would say, over 4,500 applications per year to register and or record works with the USCO. So type of works we routinely register include motion pictures, such as television series and major theatrical films, screenplays, style guides, comic books, computer programs, source code, and video games. We also record copyright related documents in connection with these categories of works. And we use the Copyright Public Records Catalog for chain of title research. So at Warner Media, we appreciate the USCO's modernization efforts thus far and look forward to collaborating on further advancements with the other panelists on this committee. Thank you. Guess I'm the shortest.
Thank you, Kathleen. Yeah, you're going to get a sticker later for the
Yay.
that you
I
got
get
to
the
put on
prize.
your. Yeah, I made up the most minutes. Jeff Sedlick of the Picture Licensing Universal System or Plus Coalition is the next member to give opening remarks.
Thanks, David. As you mentioned, my name is Jeff Sedlick, and I'm the president and CEO of the Plus Coalition. I'm also a professional photographer and a professor at the Art Center College of Design here in Pasadena, California. I very much appreciate the opportunity to participate as an advisor on the modernization of the Copyright Office. First, a bit of background on the Plus Coalition. We're a nonprofit, neutral coalition of museums, libraries, publishers, researchers, educational institutions, creators, designers, advertising agencies, design firms, sister organizations, and others spanning 120 countries. Our mission is quite narrow. It's to simplify and facilitate the communication and management of rights information for visual artworks. And it's worthwhile to note that the PLUS Coalition was founded at the suggestion of former Register Mary Beth Peters and has now been operating for 13 years. And our rights metadata standards are in broad use in applications used for creating, distributing, using, and preserving visual artworks. For example, Adobe has integrated the PLUS standards in all of its applications, and Google most recently adopted PLUS metadata field to identify rights holders in Google image search results. The PLUS Coalition recommends, I just said Google and my phone started talking back at me. That was fine. The PLUS Coalition welcomes participation by stakeholders in all communities, and you can learn more about us at plus.org. In addition to representing the PLUS Coalition, I'm also participating on behalf of the American Photographic Artists, the Professional Photographers of America, the National Press Photographers Association, the Graphic Artists Guild, the North American Nature Photographers Association, the American Society of Media Photographers, and the American Society for Collective Rights Licensing. As a member of this new committee, I appreciate the promise of a user-focused system for registration, recordation, and other interactions between the public and the Copyright Office. I've personally participated in user testing of various systems under development, and I'm very encouraged by the expertise and passion of the team and what I've seen to date. In my brief introduction today, I'm going to mention two worthy modernization goals. First, I'm particularly interested in furthering the development and availability of APIs to permit the public to use third-party applications to register their works, search the registration database, and otherwise interact with the Copyright Office systems. In this way, the office can leverage the vast technology resources across the marketplace. Most importantly, the use of APIs will permit claimants to use applications within their existing workflows to more efficiently register their works in the limited time that they have available to do so. Second, I'm particularly interested in increasing the efficiency of the registration and examination process, especially for visual arts, which will provide significant benefit to the public, perhaps most importantly, to permit the Copyright Office to lower its internal costs of processing registrations, which will allow the Copyright Office, hopefully, to decrease the fees associated with registrations. And in particular for visual works, and specifically for photography and illustration, to permit a significant increase in the quantity of works that can be registered on a single application, which is currently limited due to some inefficiencies in the examination process that are in turn due to the application that the examiners are forced to use. All that should go away in the near future. This will allow claimants to submit both published and unpublished works on a single registration, as long as they identify them as published or unpublished. And to put this in context, many professional photographers create over 1,000 photographs per week, some 1,000 photographs a day. But just taking that 1,000 new works per week as a measure, to register those new works under the limitation of 750 works per registration would require 6 to 8 registrations per month. That's 72 to 96 registrations per year, requiring that a photographer pay up to $5,300 a year in registration fees. That might not be very much for an enterprise, but a lot of photographers make $30,000 or $40,000 a year. And if they're making $40,000 a year, those registration fees are 13% of their annual income. It's formidable, and they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. They can't afford to register, and they can't afford not to register. These are just two important goals for modernization, and I have many more. I again thank the library for establishing this committee and holding these meetings, and I look forward to supporting your efforts.
Jeff, thank you so much. The final panelist who's going to be providing opening remarks this morning, final member of the Copyright Public Modernization Committee, is Scott Weingart of the Association for Computers and the Humanities. Scott, feel free to turn on your camera and your microphone.
Thanks, David, and hi, everyone. I'm here representing, as David said, the Association for Computers and the Humanities, which is the major US-based digital humanities professional society. In addition to the ACH, I'm on the executive board of the International Alliance of Digital Humanities Organizations, and I direct the Navari Family Center for Digital Scholarship at the University of Notre Dame. By training, I am an historian of science and a data scientist, and have worked for more than a decade on large-scale analyses of and infrastructures for cultural heritage collections. In this capacity, I previously directed initiatives at Indiana University, Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, and the National Library of the Netherlands. I'm also the author of a couple books and a few dozen articles on topics ranging from folklore to bioinformatics, and an editor of scholarly collections and an occasional software developer. My interest in the Copyright Public Modernization Committee is to represent my scholarly peers from the Association for Computers and the Humanities. In addition to our authoring and publication interests, our community makes regular use of copyright records for research. We use both individual records in aid of finding further resources and use records en masse as part of large-scale analyses. Our organization has actively been involved in the digitization, fair use, and legal ramifications of large-scale text corpora. Interfacing with copyright records is an essential part of that process, both one at a time and via algorithmically accessible APIs. In addition to our research interests, our organization also represents librarians, archivists, and publishers who all interact with the Copyright Office in their various roles. We further have a vested interest in the accessibility of copyright IT infrastructure, ensuring it remains inclusive and usable by a broad, diverse, and international public. With that, I think I'll end a bit early, and thank you, David, and everyone so much for the opportunity to be part of this committee. I am very much looking forward to working with all of you over the next few years.
Scott, thank you so much, and thank you to the rest of the panelists. So in a minute, we're going to come back, and I'm going to sort of talk through some of the main themes that I heard during this, and then we're going to open up for a panel discussion. But because we're running a couple of minutes ahead of time, we have time for a quick bio break. So we're going to pause the session for 5 minutes, and I'm going to set the same timer that I've been using to time the members of the committee for their remarks. And we'll be coming back at 2:30 on the dot. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and we'll see you shortly. All right, it's 2:30. Welcome back, everyone. I'd like to start by thanking everyone for those opening remarks. It's really an extraordinary group that we've assembled here today. I heard so many great topics mentioned by panelists. I heard much experience with software implementation. I heard the phrase, "we're all software companies now." I suppose that's not true of the Copyright Office. We're a software agency, not a software company. I heard a lot of excitement about the stage that we are in the enterprise copyright system now. I heard the question about what can the role of community developed standards, standard identifiers be in the copyright ecosystem. I heard the desire to incorporate copyright registration, recordation, licensing into workflows. I heard the need for APIs and bulk data. I heard about access to pilots and prototypes. And then we received a question actually from a member of the public, which I'm going to address now since we're not actually into the question and answer period yet. But how does one's organization or as a person become a member of the Copyright Public Modernization Committee? Earlier this year, the Librarian of Congress announced the forming of this committee and solicited applications for people to join the Copyright Public Modernization Committee. And then it went through a review period, and the librarian appointed the 13 people who are with us today. And we'll be meeting twice a year over the remaining years of the copyright modernization process. I'd like now to invite the panelists to turn on your cameras and be ready to turn on your microphones as we move into our panel discussion period. And I want people to know that as we have more of these events and as we know each other better, I would anticipate that we'll spend less time with introducing ourselves to one another and more time on some of the longer and more substantive discussions. But I wanted to start out with a question that was actually raised by the panel and by several of the panelists during the time we heard from lots of folks that user-centered design and that software implementations are part of their day-to-day work. And I wanted to hear if there are lessons that people would like to share, that panelists would like to share with the Library of Congress and the Copyright Office from software implementations that have gone on in each of your organizations. And I would also encourage you that if you have specific questions for the Copyright Office or for the agency, that now would be a time to begin to raise those questions as well. I'm not guaranteeing that we'll have the opportunity to answer every question on this session. We do have limited time, but I would also remind the panelists, and I also remind members of the public that the crew that we've assembled here today are experts in the software implementation side of things. These are people who are prioritizing from the business side and who are doing implementation from the IT side. And the set of people that we've assembled here today are not people who are prepared to speak on policy and on the legal matters of the Copyright Office. And I would also encourage everyone to remember, as the Register of Copyrights stated in her opening remarks, that we're very, very open to those conversations, and there are formal mechanisms for going through the process of the policymaking process. But that we'd like to commit the time today to focusing on IT implementations. So with that, would any of the panelists like to start at? And for this, we're going to do this a little bit different than we did the opening remarks. And I would like everyone to think about keeping your responses in the 30 to 60 second range. And also feel free to unmute yourself and jump in. But if you feel like you're not getting in, feel free to message me or use the raise hand function that the panelists have been provided with. And finally, if there are questions that we are going to direct back to the agency, I'll field those questions and do my best to determine which person on the agency side would be most suitable for answering them. So is there anyone who'd like to start by sharing lessons from their own software implementations for us, if there are specific lessons learned that the Copyright Office should be thinking about? See, I thought everybody was going to unmute all at once.
Can I just jump in? I raised my hand, but then I guess you want us to jump in, right? So if it's okay, I'll base my experiences on prior experiences, because I'm on the policy side and we're not going to talk about policy here today at the Copyright Alliance. With my prior experiences, as an engineer and working on various projects, I would say, just shared experiences. Having a common lexicon is significantly important. You have lots of, especially in really, really large groups, you want people using the same terminology so everyone knows what everyone's talking about. I know that was something that the OIG, I think actually not last year, I guess now 2 years ago, report had identified as an issue for the OCIO and the Copyright Office. But I think that for me is one of the shared lessons. I think communication is obviously a significant factor in a large group progress like this. Having people share information almost on a daily basis. What we heard earlier today about the scrums, the daily scrums and things like that are essential to making sure that if somebody's going in the wrong direction, you can say, well, wait a minute. Or if somebody found out a new demand or requirement or problem, that can be worked into the program without a huge step back. Certainly it might be somewhat of a step back, but without a huge step back. So since you asked us to limit it to 30 seconds, I'll just stop there.
Hey, thank you, Keith. Brewster, would you go next?
Yes, openness is your friend. And I think it's going to be a difficult lesson for the Copyright Office to hear, because if you open up, lots of people want to help and may feel like criticism, but think of it as commentary, like what UPenn did to go and digitize a lot of the copyright records, and then Gutenberg corrected with Internet Archive help and hosting, and Stanford, and there's lots of others. And it may seem like competition or whatever, but just think of it as all people trying to help go forward. And so I think it's going to be really tough as a government group to feel that love in a place where it may be always interpreted as criticism. And so I would just put stuff out there, invite a lot of people to do summer projects with your data, and you've got the blessing of openness, right? I mean, there's nothing about this stuff that's copyrighted. Thank God. So go forth and have fun with it and iterate like nuts.
We're definitely feeling the love today, Brewster. Thank you. Jeff Sedlick.
So in Agile development, which I fully support, there is a temptation to pick off the lowest hanging fruit and develop that first. And what can happen then, and I have personal experience with that, is you might develop. I'll use a specific example. Right now, they've been working on the standard application for many months, and the standard application does not have the same complexity as the group registration forms. And the group registration forms, when the team hits that, might require a redesign of the standard application in order to make them consistent so that the public doesn't see completely different things when they're looking at those two different areas. And so I guess my suggestion is that you not pick off the lowest hanging fruit when developing. You have to, even if you're moving quickly, you need to consider where you're going to be, and that group registration is a beast. And in my user testing, I noted that to the team, and I think they did take notes.
Thank you, Jeff. Jim Neal.
Yes, in my experience working with user-centered design, I think it's very important that the designers and the users be seen as equal in the process. People come to this work with different experience and skill levels. And I've seen projects flounder because the designers will talk down to the users, or users think they know everything. So it's very important that equality be established. It also means a commitment to education, to educate all the players and parties involved in it, to have a common understanding. I think vocabulary was a good selection of how that might work as well. But I think that's very important.
Thank you, Jim. Scott.
Thank you. So I would encourage you all to take some inspiration from your peers over in the Library of Congress labs, who a few years ago, I believe, or maybe just recently, put together a page of Library of Congress for robots, in understanding that users are not just people, but now in this sort of bold future that we live in, are often large algorithmic systems. And so making sure that when you're designing, you are designing with not just individuals in mind, but these large systems in mind as co-equal users.
Thank you, Scott. You couldn't know this, obviously, but I'm about 15 feet from LC Labs as I'm coming to you live over the internet. They're through the wall right in this direction. Kathleen, Melissa, Pamela, Roy, Susan, Wahaj, any additional thoughts about the topic of IT implementation and lessons learned from your organizations?
Sorry, Susan. You want to go first?
You can go. I'll go next.
That's the problem with Zoom. It's anyway, and I apologize if the noise, I'm in New York City, if the noise is too loud behind me, let me know. It sounds loud to me. There was a phrase I think you used, David, early on when you were describing this committee, and that this committee is going to exist for the, if I misquoted you, you said, the modernization period, or the 2 years that you're doing this modernization effort. Modernization doesn't end. And I just want to be really clear that, whatever you've done in 2 years, if you want it to be modern, it won't be in 2 years and a quarter unless you're constantly modernizing. So just keep that in mind. You don't come out and say, we're done, and then move on, or else you end up with systems that are almost instantly antiquated, particularly how quickly things are moving today.
So true, Roy, and thank you. Hopefully folks heard that remarks from the Register at the beginning of this, talking about her two sort of thematic guideposts for this, one of which is continuous modernization. Susan, would you go next?
Yes, I just wanted to sort of lean into something that Keith had said, which was emphasizing how many different kinds of users there are and how many different kinds of works there are, and to ask a question as to how you generate your sort of pilot users or your other the users from whom you're getting input. Obviously, if you're looking for volunteers, you can't conscript people, but it seems really important that you're getting a broad cross section. And it sort of goes to what Jeff is saying too, not just people that are registering individual works one at a time, people that are registering groups of work in all different formats, all different media, all different types of work. So I guess it's really a question, which is how do you make sure you have a cross section in your sort of test group?
Thank you, Susan. And I just wanted to reiterate that one of the things that I've been hearing a lot throughout this session is wide diversity of users and the desire to increase the diversity of the user pool. So I'd like to, with that, I think if we've got a couple of people on the line who I think can be quite informative and helpful about this specifically. So obviously the people who are members of this committee are aware of the formal process, the notice of proposed rulemaking, the notice of inquiry, those kinds of processes. But before we get to Pamela and Micah for some comments on this, I wonder if Natalie Buddha-Smith, our Director of User Experience and Design, would want to give just a quick synopsis of how we find users to test the products that we're doing and how we've done it throughout this process.
Right, and I also want to address, diversity and inclusion is very important to us, and we try to be as diverse and inclusive across the software development lifecycle, and we do this in multiple ways. So we're not only testing one way with a group of people. We're doing formative testing. So some of you may have been included or heard about us testing with actual users in the prototyping, wireframing, more of the conceptual phases of a project. And then we also do evaluative testing where we're showing the code in development or in pilot, something that's more towards the end of the software development lifecycle. So we're making sure that we're doing user research and we're including users and getting feedback at all phases of the lifecycle. We're not waiting to the end because we really want input all along the way in an iterative and as upfront as possible, because that's when we can make the most change with the least amount of technical debt. And we're also doing qualitative testing as well as quantitative testing. And some of you have backgrounds in this, so you know the difference. But with qualitative testing, we do spend an hour or so with an individual and get in-depth feedback on a feature or a prototype that is really sets the context and gives us the understanding of how it's being used and what are their thought processes. And then we do quantitative testing, which allows us to reach a larger amount of people to give us feedback that tends to be more structured. Qualitative testing is less structured, more free-flowing. Quantitative is more structured, but we can actually include more people, more audiences when we do quantitative. I could talk for this on this subject for hours. So sorry, I'm probably, David, I'm waiting for that post-it to go up. So we do include users. We do have established lists, like you've heard Sara Garski earlier, invite people to, send in your names if you want to be involved. So we have established lists that we pull from that we're constantly adding people to. And when we do testing, depending on qualitative, quantitative, which service we're testing, we put together a profile based on personas in order to find the right types of people to test that specific feature or prototype, so that we are being diverse, inclusive, and getting a range of users, a range of personas that we've established a while back. Thank you. I hope that answers a bit of that. Again, I can talk for hours on this, so I hope I hit the.
So on the topic of Natalie talking for hours, I hope people are aware that we have a number of webinars that we've done along the way as we've gotten into copyright IT modernization. And I'd like to, as we kind of move through the next set of questions, I'm cognizant of like keeping the conversation going, but also of getting a wide array of perspectives as well. So I'm gonna err on the side of calling on members of the committee who have not yet spoken. And Pamela, I'd like you to go next, and then Micah, and then Todd, and then Brewster again.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I was just going to respond to a couple of the previous remarks. One was on the idea that modernization is a moving target, and it is a constant, we're always reaching for it. We never quite get there because it's always ahead of us. But I think one of the components of that is not just the not just the system itself, but the information that the system is trying to record. So in other words, like right now, we might look at classifications of creative work as a work of visual art or a work of performance as forms of creativity change in response to technologies. How we classify creative content also changes, and I feel like that. I'm sure your designers have thought through this, but I think that's a real challenge for the definitions, the stakeholders who are involved in those perhaps collaborative works or works that might be called one thing and then 2 years later be called something else, are real challenges. And I think that, from the point of view of having developed systems for managing rights information, the point before digital audio streaming existed, we didn't think to build towards how you manage the records of that. And then suddenly existed, and we needed to figure that out. So yeah, building in a modular structure so that it's not just responsive to changes in copyright statutes, but changes in users' perceptions of what exactly they're registering.
Use patterns, right?
Yeah. So.
That's very helpful.
And the other thing that is related to that, I think that is important in developing systems that people are going to use is that the way people use the information drives the what they value out of it, and vice versa. So although the data may be a static thing, that all that information is sitting there behind the system, a creator's perception of why that system exists is one thing, and a copyright user has a different perception of why they need to search those databases. And I think it's really important to try to get both of those sides of the conversation involved in the
both of those perspectives.
Yeah.
I like that. Micah.
Thanks. I just posted a written version of what I'm going to say in the chat, not to be duplicative, but I guess one thing that jumps out at me in any system design is kind of this idea of a vocal minority and a less vocal majority. And I think in this context, most of the folks on this call and most of what we're talking about, contemplate users as basically creators and rights holders, and just recognizing that there are, basically the entire country are going to be impacted by this downstream as users of copyrighted works. And so that's a little tricky, I think. They're not users per se. And I don't know if capturing them in personas would work very well or not. It would be an interesting tweak on Agile. But I guess I just want to, make a vote for and remind us to think about how subtle decisions we make or you make in designing this system will have really big impacts potentially for lots of folks who are not very represented here because they're not actually going to be registrants of copyright. They're going to be users of the copyrighted works downstream. So I would just make a plug for, pushing ourselves to think about how these decisions and these systems will impact those folks down the line, and know that, you know, we're going to have lots of people signing up that own copyrights, and the people that don't own a copyright but want to use a copyrighted work are going to be a little harder. They're not following this. They're probably not aware this is happening, but ultimately this system should serve them as well. So anything we can do to bring those stakeholder groups' interests into the process, I think would be really valuable.
Thanks, Micah. Todd?
Yeah, that was a great point, Micah. The people who are likely to be using these systems are not even, more and more people are becoming creators with their phones, with their, you know, as technology expands, they don't really understand copyright and how the Copyright Office works or how copyright systems works. That acknowledging that is going to be important. The other thing, the reason I raised my hand is kind of hearkening back to what Natalie mentioned, which is technical debt. Oftentimes organizations are really wrapped up into, well, we have this old system and we need to, you know, accommodate it moving forward, rather than breaking and moving forward with a new system. And I hope through this process, the office isn't bound and really feeling bound by what had been done. A lot of government agencies have a lot of technical debt, and through this process, I hope we're jettisoning some of that and building systems in a way that recognizes, as Roy mentioned, we're going to be moving through this process permanently. So recognizing that even the things we're building today, 3-5 years from now, might be considered technical debt in the future.
Thank you for that. I would like to just kind of building on a couple of those points about users of the system, that the copyright public record system, which is one of the systems that we have sort of the most access to right now, is a system where the vast majority of the users are not people who are they're not there registering a copyright necessarily. And also, before I cut Natalie Buddha-Smith off, I think one of the points that many of the users of these systems are non-IP law experts of particularly inside of libraries, and that those are some of the users that we've had doing user testing on our side. I'd like to turn to Brewster, then Melissa, then Wahaj, then Keith, and I will remember that. And then we've got a couple more questions coming up in the chat as well. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. But come back once again. There's been a lot of talk about the UI, which I think is great. Thank you. Yes, please. But I think your data is going to be really the thing that is going to drive this project bottom up and make it difficult. Your data is messy. All big data is messy. The existing registrations are kind of a mess. And the future ones, I think you could do a lot better job in trying to make it so it works a lot better. For instance, in the metadata, please invite people to use identifiers, ISBNs, ISSNs, those sorts of things. Consistent spellings of publisher names, I mean, they're all over the place. If you look at your existing records, it's really challenging. And when you start to get into registering born digital works, if you can bring those in, that will help. But also, how can you leverage digitized works to help augment your records so that people can know what you're referring to in these records? I think that's all quite possible. But right now, what exists is very difficult to use in any automated way. So I guess the message is, please invest in the data, and lots of people can help you. I think there's going to be a tension of what's official, like what's real, versus what's augmented or added on by somebody else. How do you go and make those branches so that other people's information, which may not be the Copyright Office from the original record, but it's going to be really helpful to people downstream. I think it's surfacing provenance of where did the information come from, so that you can envelop other types of information into your data sets to make it much more useful, much more searchable, just to go and help correct things. So please don't be scared of the official if you have some mechanism of going and noting that these are additional aspects to the records that were supplied by other people, kind of as Wikipedia has done, or maybe a bit more official than that. So augmenting your records, think about your data.
Thanks, Brewster. Melissa.
This is responding to a number of the different comments. First, the LC Lab is a wonderful model. I want to echo Brewster's comment that that openness is your friend. It is barring anything that may be private information or sensitive in some way, most of this data is not and would benefit from the kind of fluid use and application that several people have talked about. Also, this issue of provenance of information. We can use the data in so many different ways. And people can have a better sense of confidence in relying on decision-making that they may need to do if they know what the provenance of a given set of information is. I also just wanted to flag we're focusing on Copyright Office registration data mostly right now, but I do want to just have in the back of our minds the deposit process and where that exists or gets lost in this conversation, whether it's because of technical limitations or administrative issues. How do we think about like the quote unquote best edition, and what is that in an electronic format, and what does the Library of Congress use? And are there creative ways of distributing those responsibilities through things like through large repositories that are reliable and exist elsewhere, perhaps? You had mentioned, David, you had asked about things from our experience that might be helpful. One thing that's very organic that has made a big difference in my work has actually been including programmers in the conversations about the substance, because we do tend to think and approach things differently, whether we're lawyers, whether we're whatever your specialization is. I have found that in some projects, we didn't include programmers in those conversations. We just said, hey, make this work this way. And they did, and it worked, but not that well. And as soon as they joined us for lunch, they got, oh, now I understand what you're trying to do. And I've wanted one in particular to do some professional conversations with me about like how to work with your programmer. And of course, true to stereotype, this person is too, doesn't want to be in front of people. So I think that's a conversation to have. Pamela's comments also were really interesting to me about like, how do we categorize these works? Because it's not unusual to think you're looking at a book, but it's registered as a poem and you miss it all together because you're going back and forth in the records. And I really do wonder, talking about this idea of technical debt, whether those categories need to be there at all anymore, or if they are helpful in some way, that it's a field, but not necessarily definitive of the rest of the access to the record. And on the subject of like users versus copyright holders, most people are both. And I work with students all the time who, the initial conversations about copyright are I want to use everything and I want to use it for free. And then it's a moment later, how do I protect my stuff? So I am trying, like in our informal conversation, they need to know both of those things. Because if they're making a video for a class that incorporates sound or music or images, it may be appropriate for class, it may not be appropriate for Vimeo. And helping them tease those things out and understanding that it's not a us-them universe by a long shot. Maybe it never was, but it really isn't now, is quite significant for me.
Thank you, Melissa. Wahaj, would you go next, and then Keith?
So I love all the commentaries so far on having these flexible data models and supporting data provenance and even just managing technical debt with that. Like a big thing in my space when we're specifically talking about software implementation is that I constantly deal with roadmap injections, right? There's constantly new features, things are changing, IP is evolving, and so are bad actors and what infringement looks like, how it's applied. So, we have to be quick about making sure our technologies are able to handle the biggest problem. And oftentimes what that problem is and how important that is different for different stakeholders within Amazon, like our customers, brands, with sellers and buyers, all the various personas. And ultimately I have to sort of manage, we have all these tactical items coming in, right? Fires we're trying to put out, but at the same time, I want to develop a product for the long term, right? And we have a number of mechanisms internally that we've used that have been very successful for us to constantly balance long-term development and evaluation of where technology is and how we should modernize and move forward, what we call these 3-year plans, which we put together every year, against the tactical items that are injected constantly into the roadmap. And oftentimes these tactical items are responding to things like policy changes, to things like technological updates, culture changing, and what consumers want, what clients, customers need. And what we've typically done is we have a very transparent set of goals that are important for our business and important for our customers, as well as like a set of like these ROI metrics for every feature, the return on investment, where we have 100 things in our roadmap. We know exactly why they are where they are in that roadmap, and we've socialized this across the business. And whenever a new injection comes in and something has to fall off, we have to make sure expectations are clear with our customers. People know what they're expecting to come, and if things get pushed back or delayed, we have to be very clear about why that occurred and why this is sort of better for the long-term state of things. And oftentimes, based on the size of the severity of that escalation or that injection, we will make that move to quickly accommodate this while we're updating our roadmaps. But it's always at the top of our mind to make sure every stakeholder knows exactly when something is pushed back, why it's pushed back, and it's reasonable, and they can accommodate it. And we'll work to see if we can find interim solutions if it was something that was key for their business, a specific feature being put out.
Thank you, Wahaj. Keith, and then immediately after Keith, I'm going to take one question from the public. So go ahead, Keith. If you're talking, you're on mute.
So there's been a lot said. There's been a lot said since somebody had to do that, right? A lot said since I first talked and spoke. And so let me start with what I first said, which is lexicon, right? We heard Micah, say, talk about users, and we heard other people, at least when I talk about users, and this is something we ought to all come to an agreement, like what word we're going to use here. I'm talking about users of Copyright Office systems and information, whomever that may be, right? And I'm not placing, despite the fact that I represent creators and copyright owners, one group over another, right? Now, obviously, you got to get good information in to get good information out. And so we're going to have to make sure we get that good information in, which is more the folks that I represent. But maybe we call them customers instead, maybe user. I think that's something we ought to all agree on, see if we can come to agreement on, so we don't kind of run into any conflict. Because I think at the end of the day, what I'm hearing from a lot of folks is, is kind of similar goals and purposes and support kind of with what's going on. Second thing that came up that I wanted to respond to, and there's about 6 here, so I'll try to do them as quickly as I can, was the public records search system, CPRS, right? There is a pilot going on right now. You can just go to the website and do a search, and they have the old system, I think it's called Voyager, and the new system. I went to go give feedback, and if not for the help of a colleague of mine, I could not for the darndest figure out how to give feedback. I mean, I think it's got to be more clear that this is a pilot and that you're looking for feedback from people, because feedback is hidden next to contact information at the very bottom of the screen and things like that. So I don't know, this is kind of, to me, a little bit different, this meeting than I thought it was going to be. I thought you were going to maybe look for not only our input, but maybe questions and about things. And so we'll see how that goes. The third comment on what Brewster said, that data is going to drive this project. Yeah, that's true, but there's a whole bunch of other things that are going to drive this project too, right? And I think if we start putting our individual goals over the goals of what the Copyright Office's goals should be, we will be misdirecting the Copyright Office and library. I don't think data is the driver. I think it is a driver. Okay, but there's a lot of drivers here of this modernization project, and so I think if we start kind of saying, oh, what's number one driver, so I think we've really run into some problems. Melissa said a couple things about the provenance of information. I want to call people's attention. I won't talk about it in detail here. Something called the Content Authenticity Initiative, which was announced a couple of years ago by Adobe, the New York Times, and Twitter, and it has a whole bunch of other members since. And if we're talking about, the veracity and integrity of information, that's something that we ought to be, this group ought to be looking into. And it's an open standard and everything. So that's something to potentially consider. Melissa also mentioned best edition and the definition of best edition. Look, I'm up for that, talking about that, but this is not about policy. So I think that's for another forum. And so happy certainly to talk about that. And then she also talks about, well, users are also creators these days and copyright owners. And I'm not going to disagree with that, but I will kind of disagree on one point, which is there is a difference, right? The creators that we represent, yes, there are of course users at times also, but they are doing this for a living, right? They're trying to make careers, they're trying to earn money off of this. And that's a little bit different than the person who's just kind of, using the information. And so I think we have to be careful about that distinction. And so then the last thing I'll just say is, like I said, I'm a little confused about kind of the purpose of the committee. I'm hoping that we get an opportunity to ask some questions ourselves, because I've got a bunch about the, about the SAFE framework and how it's working and what caused the OCIO to switch to a scaled Agile framework and things like that. But so far, it doesn't seem like the opportunity has arisen to ask those type of questions. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Keith. And I think you just did. So I think that's a good place to start. And I don't have a. I do want. There have been a few comments to the moderator, as well as one public question, as well as Keith's question right now, which can be summed up. What is the purpose of the Copyright Public Modernization Committee? And I think this is an area where it's easy to get sidetracked with, because I think people come to the Copyright Public Modernization Committee with their own agenda and their own reason for being here. But I would like to recenter for a moment on what was the purpose of the Library of Congress to initiate this. And I'm just going to read from the summary of, and this is possibly the most federal bureaucracy thing that I've ever did. I'm reading from the Federal Register Notice of Convening IT Modernization Public Stakeholder Committee, which is that the Library of Congress is convening a public committee to enhance communication and provide a public forum for the technology-related aspects of the U.S. Copyright Office's modernization initiative. At this time, the library is announcing that it will accept applications from qualified members of the public to serve on the committee. The scope of contributions made by the committee are limited to the specific topics set forth in this notice. Membership will be on a volunteer basis with the expectation of in-person or virtual participation at 2 open forums a year at the member's own expense. So I just want to draw our attention back to that, not because it is not because it's a satisfying answer, but because it's the real answer. It really is the assigning any purpose sort of beyond the purpose of convening and taking in questions and asking questions. I will say that for the agency, it certainly is an opportunity to draw on the expertise of this group. And if the group has a strong feeling that the best way to draw on the expertise really is to field questions and to sort of answer them in this context. So that's the sort of friendliest and most helpful thing. I think that's a thing we can talk about for future committees. But it really is, it is our hope in this inaugural committee to sort of get to know the participants, to get to show some of the work we've been doing, to get to hear the advice of experts from the field, and also to get to answer questions. So Pamela Malpas is going to give a quick remark next, and then I'm going to turn a question back to the staff of the agency.
Thanks for giving me a chance. And I will keep it brief. I thought it was maybe worth remarking that this idea of the distinction between the users versus the creators, which again, we can get into taxonomy and discussions about what those labels mean. But within the context of technology development and creating an IT system that works, I think I sort of see it as that there are the individual data records of a registration, of a recordation, of a whatever piece of data is being stored. And then there's the what you can do with that data, which is the information that comes out of that. And I think that there are distinctions in the way that creators who may register copyrights, but who may also consult the databases to see what other stuff has been registered. They think of this as their safeguard. These are their assets, to acknowledge what Keith was saying, that this stuff is really has a real importance to them in monetary value. Some people who are researching that data have a different perspective, and I think it's worth considering that where the level of privacy or safeguard lies, that there's the individual unit of information that is being recorded that has a discrete value to the registrant or claimant or copyright owner. But opening all of that up, opening it up maybe more broadly than we're accustomed to having it open, is a little like, I think for many copyright holders, they view this as their the library of their assets, the record of what they have that has value. Okay, other people also see it that way because they want to see what has been registered and what may not have. But I think it's a little like us asking someone to show their bank account. I want to see all of your assets. Well, nobody's really interested in having everyone look at what their assets are, and yet, yeah, it feels like that's a data issue for the individual record versus the output that is possible to create, or draw out sets of data that say these are copyrighted works, or these are things that through some separate algorithm you can determine are close to their PD status. I think those are important, and as data becomes more accessible, those issues become more prominent. So when we move away from paper, that stuff becomes more possible, and it becomes more important for us to address it as the system is being built. Enough from me.
Thank you, Pamela. So with that, it seems like there's a strong appetite for some questions for staff of the agency. I guess I'd like to invite, I have some more of the prepared questions that I sent out, but I'm curious if there are sort of what questions do our panelists have that seem like whether they're answers that we have. Susan, go ahead. Was that a hand raise, or was that?
Yes.
Yes, it was. Physical hand.
I just wanted to touch on some sort of system issues that my members brought to my attention that we haven't touched on yet. They're kind of in the weeds, and I'm not really sure where they fit in here. One is having to do with the payment processing system. So of course you can't register without paying fees. And my understanding is there's issues exiting out of the registration portal into pay.gov, glitches, things hang up, you sort of lose your cart. issues like that, it takes a long time. And also, you're not able to get the same kind of itemized receipt of all your different transactions if you're registering multiple works as you are when you're using a deposit account. So that's one whole issue that we haven't touched on at all. Security, I think people have talked about that, but again, in a digital world, my members, digital recordings are their absolute lifeblood. If there was a way for people to siphon those out of the deposit system here, that would be, just the worst possible thing that could happen. And so I know you guys have talked about security and that you're complying with NIST standards. I guess we would ask that you comply with industry standard security measures. So for example, we would want to see sound recordings protected as well at the Library of Congress or the Copyright Office as they are at Spotify. And I'm sure the motion picture people would want their stuff protected as well as Netflix does. And so, that industry standard security measures. A couple of other quick things there. I've also been told that when you're trying, this is related to the payment issue for when you're trying to register a volume of works, which is what happens when you're, a large copyright owner that registers lots of different works. Again, there's a lot of system glitches. You can't stay in it, you get kicked out, things like that.
And Susan, just to clarify, you're talking about the legacy system now?
Whatever system my members are currently registering.
Yeah, the current
ECO. Yes,
right.
Which raises a whole nother question. You talked earlier about version 2 of the registration system. Is that going to be an improvement of ECO, or is that going to completely replace ECO?
That's a great question. I'd like to pause there if it's okay with you, just because you've raised so many topics. I mean, okay. I think if the panelists agree that the best use of our time is just to sort of go through a list of issues, I will say that there are that we do have a lot of sort of avenues for feedback of that. But I think specifically talking about the registration system that we're talking about, that is a full replacement of ECO. So the bugs and the problems that you talked about, those are literally our major reasons for undertaking the modernization effort. There are some long-standing problem, and I hope it's not showing my hand too much to share that for every glitch that's encountered by somebody who's registering a copyright, there are probably 10 for the person on the inside of the agency who has to use the same system to go through the process. And so those frustrations are certainly shared, and that's in the forefront of our mind as we develop the new systems. I did want to use this opportunity, since we do have a number of staff from the agency on the line, to see if we could just have a brief word about system security. And I think we've got a couple of people on the line. Judith Conklin, are you our CIO in waiting? Are you on the line? There's Judith. Yes. Judith, can you talk a little bit about IT security? I know this is an area where you've done a lot of work over a long career.
Thank you. Yes, I know we always talk about the NIST standards and that we follow NIST, but there are a lot of other things that we have put in place. For instance, we use CIS benchmarks, and we can provide that information, but also the CISO is on the phone if he hasn't, Sean Lang, or is on the panel if he wants to add anything to what we use. I'm looking for him on the.
Yeah, hi everyone.
Thank you.
To elaborate on what Judith said and what was asked earlier, yes,
we do agree following industry standards is something we do strive for. We use NIST as a basis for our security program. So that is used for the policies, procedures, things like that. As for the actual technology portion, we are a supporting member of CIS, the Center for Information Security, and basically they generate hardening standards for technologies. We also work with each of the technologies. We leverage their best practices and to assure that we are doing exactly the best possible protections for our internal data, as well as the data that's entrusted to us to protect.
Also, I'd like to add that we are currently working on, if anyone here has heard of Zero Trust, and implementing Zero Trust in our environment. And we absolutely would include copyright information, copyright data in our Zero Trust platform or initiative.
Thank you, Judith, and thank you, Sean. Keith has his hand up and has promised me a whole list of questions. So Keith,
yeah. So I guess
and if I could just interject one more thing before I just hand off to you. We have a fairly small number of questions and coming in from the public Q&A, and I think that I would like to just sort of treat the members of the group as delegates. So if you have questions to bring up that you feel like the public would want to ask of either the agency or one of the panelists, that's great as well. So go ahead, Keith. Sorry for that interruption.
I think while I do have a lot of questions, I think they can all probably be answered in one. They're all related to one thing and probably can be answered all together. But first, just on security, since we were talking about that, there was some talk about NIST standards and whatever, and I know just in reading up on some of the reports and the testimony and things like that, that the DMCA designated agent directory was not in fact compliant with the NIST standard, and that the OCI was working to make that happen. It didn't incorporate multi-factor authentication or password length requirements as required by NIST. And the OCI goal was to fix that by the end of fiscal year 2020. The question there is, did that happen? But putting that aside also, like, look, if there's a vulnerability with regard to e-deposits, like waiting 6 months or 8 months is not a solution, whatever the end result is. I mean, that's very, very worrisome. So that was one of my questions with regard to security. With regard to the SAFE framework, as you read through all the materials and watch all the webinars and everything that have been, over the several years, there's a little bit of sort of jumping around in terms of, like, okay, so as near as I can tell, there was no definitive date, but it appears that the SAFE framework was implemented in either October or November of 2020. But there's no mention, well, why move to the SAFE framework? What was being used before? It was some other Agile framework, or was it, God forbid, some waterfall methodology, which would be concerning, of course. So, why move to the SAFE framework then? Was that a response to the OIG report? I think it was September of 2019 that talked about the need for an integrated master schedule, or was there some other reason? So I kind of group all those questions together about SAFE. And then lastly, registration. We talked about the fact that there's this user testing of the prototype has begun. I really couldn't find much at all on that. I mean, it says it's going on, but I have no idea how many people are testing this prototype, who they are. Is it a mix of big corporations and individual creators? And is it a mix of different types of works? And is it a mix of group registration and individual registration? So those are my three questions. Hopefully it's not too overwhelming.
Great, thanks, Keith. So I heard a question there about the move to scaled Agile. I heard a question there about the registration prototype and how we're deciding who's testing it. And can you just repeat the third question one more time? It was...
So the third question, the registration question, or the security, because the surety question, I think, is designated agent, and the fact that
Right, was that completed?
Not NIST compliant at the time, and I never saw anything else that said, yes, now we're NIST compliant, so it's curious.
So Judith, why don't you go ahead with the first one?
We have not implemented MFA yet on DMCA. We're working with copyright to do so. And I believe that we did require or change the password length. And we can get confirmation of that. Go ahead, Sean.
But to also address, we did close all of the findings from the GAO report in regards to information security to include the compliance with NIST. And we have rolled out MFA internally for all users.
So I did want to talk, thank you for that, Judith and Sean, and to talk a little bit, you asked a question, Keith, like sort of what were we doing before and the move to scaled agile. So this is a specific thing that I think there's a long answer, but the slightly shorter answer is that we've got a few people on the call who can kind of weigh in on the agency's evolution. I think Jim Karmanis, is Jim Karmanis from OCIO on the call to talk about the sort of evolution?
He is not. Bill Kellum is on, right. Bill Kellum should be on the call.
Perfect. Bill, would you like to talk a little bit about the agency's
or Mike Nybeck, by the way.
I see Bill has just turned on his camera.
Okay.
Right. So we've been using Agile, primarily Agile Scrum, but also some projects using Kanban for a number of years, going back at least a decade. So the reason that we have been adopting the scaled Agile framework is largely to coordinate the number of different streams of interrelated work that are required to deliver the copyright modernization. It increases the collaboration between the different stakeholder groups in copyright and in OCIO, and allows us to plan and prioritize in a way that meets copyright's business objectives, our contracting lead times, our need to coordinate this kind of different streams of technical resources. So just as the program got bigger and bigger, it became valuable to implement a much more formal planning and prioritization process, which so far has been quite successful. We have a lot of experience doing large projects with Agile. Congress.gov, LOC.gov, projects like that have been done by the same team using those techniques and using the kind of continuous integration, continuous delivery techniques that we're also using for copyright.
Thank you. Really, Micah, just thanks for all that. It's very, very helpful. And I don't want anyone to get the impression that I'm not, supportive. I think moving to Agile is a move. I don't want to come across as combative or anything. So I just was, in reading through the materials, it was just a big question on my mind. So thank you very much.
And just to confirm, we have invoked the character requirement for DMCA according to our policy.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Judith. Jeff Sedlick, could you sort of go next? Hopefully you've got a whole list for us as well.
I just have one thing I want to bring up, actually. So, we've been talking about privacy and, well, actually two things. So for the claimants, especially for the independent creators, the use and accessibility of their personal identifiable information is very important. And that a certain level of privacy needs to be available to them in the new system at their option to protect them. I mean, there's a trade-off between access to public information, but they shouldn't have to give up all of their privacy in order to be able to register their works. That's one thing. And secondly, and I suppose this mixes in policy, but my question is not going to be on policy. I just need to know if on the roadmap for this new system, if the office intends to make deposit copies available to the public, because that would be a very significant concern. Accessibility through this new system to deposit copies for creators who have not yet published their work or who have participated in confidential projects and want to register their works before the public has access. Very important to them that their works not be accessible in this system.
I'll touch on the privacy first, David.
Thank you, Judith.
And obviously, the Copyright Office will take the second. I was going to mention PIA, personally identifiable information, or PII, sorry. And the Zero Trust will, first of all, it is part of our security package and our implementation. PII is, and we protect PII specifically. There is, and that is within NIST now too. They added it several years ago, but also Zero Trust will help us do that in a very secure way. It's another layer of protecting that data, that Zero Trust initiative.
Thank you, Judith. So Jeff raised a specific question about a specific feature as well, and I think I would like to, for those who are sort of in the call who are not aware that this is that this would be a question of policy that would be handled by the usual policy engine of the agency. So there would be no way for example, to use the scaled Agile framework to decide how a policy question gets answered. That has to be answered prior to it going into a product backlog, and that the scaled Agile framework is what we use to prioritize what we're doing next. And as with all IT projects, when we get closer to a release, our confidence gets higher. So it's easy to mention for example, like the copyright public record system has a release next month. And it's very easy for us to talk about it with high confidence because we've all been looking at it on internal systems, and that as we go further out, it's a little bit more difficult to know about specific dates or specific features. I will say that on the specific topic of the copyright registration system, that they're very focused on the registration process currently, and that's the I don't know if any of the product owner for registration wants to weigh in at all on the specific features that are being prioritized currently. TJ, if you want to do that, you can unmute and turn your camera on. I'm going to take
sure. I mean,
are
we talking about in the current program increments? So under the Scaled Agile framework, we work in 3-month increments. And so sure, I'd be happy to talk about what we're doing right now. So so I don't bury the lead. Let me start with the most important thing. We have begun work on the external system. So leading up until now, we were working with one team, working mostly on the internal side of the system. So these are staff, examination functions, all these workflows that support kind of the internal functions. And the reason we did that was so that we could spend a little bit more time on the user research phase, on the user testing, and making sure that we have some good high confidence in what we're going to start building on the external side of the system. So starting last month, we actually onboarded a second team, and we're doing that in tandem with this internal team where we're working on the external side of the system. So specifically in starting that process, unfortunately, there's a lot of not very interesting things that I can share with the group in terms of there's a lot of infrastructure stuff we've got to stand up and all that kind of stuff. I can say last week we had a very crucial moment of hello world moment where in the first 3 weeks of this external team starting, we have seen the overall landing page and where these different questions, the application form is going to flow and all that kind of stuff. So again, it's to say that not much that we could show basically in images here, but a lot of work to stand this up in the last few weeks with that second team. So let's turn to the internal side. On the internal side, we're focusing on building out the foundation for our correspondence system. So this is something we're referring to as the message center. This is very exciting for us because we're moving from a model where we were sending substantive emails to applicants, which created all kinds of problems in terms of not necessarily being able to connect the the substantive emails and replies, and then some of them would go to spam filters and junk folders. And so some of these different types of emails would not necessarily make it back to us in a timely process, and it cut down on the efficiency on us actually being able to work through the work. So now we're moving to more of a doctor's office type model, where I get a notification from my doctor's office via text, via a robocall, via a non-substantive email. And then I'm told, okay, you have a message waiting for you in the message center, and then you log into the message center and we correspond on the system in here. So that's to say that during this PI, we're standing up the internal side of that, which will then dovetail over to the external side once we, in future increments, once we start working on that. We're continuing the user research on the external components of the system. So there's a component of that in each PI where we're actually looking ahead to all these different things. I heard a lot of talk about, are we considering the standard application? Are we considering the group applications? The answer is absolutely yes. We're looking at all of those things during that user research phase, which isn't necessarily part of a technical operation where we're handing that over to developers. But that's where we're working together as a group to try to figure out some of these things, to get ahead and figure out the answers to some of those questions before it becomes time to start to develop those things. The other things that we're working on for the internal side are, again, these are things that may not seem that important, but we do have to have an audit history. So everything that happens to a case once it comes in, once an application has been received by the office and it goes through the different steps, we need to have an audit trail of all that. So we're working on that in this PI. And then we're also working on some user permission type facets of the system. So user permissions, setting up roles for these different types of users. And this is looking to automate some of the many manual processes that we have right now in assigning work to individual examiners or assigning it to a particular division, setting up this user access and these preferences in a way that we'll be able to automate getting the right cases to the right people. All this speaks to the efficiency, right, on our side, where we're going to be able to hopefully speed up or make the not necessarily speed up, but make the process more efficient once it's received in the office and once we do our thing on the examination side.
Thank you, TJ. And we have actually received a question from a member of the public that sort of relates, but is over on the copyright public record system about what will be included in release 2. Sean Gallagher, do you want to talk a little bit about what's going to be in that upcoming release?
David, before we move on, I did have a question on the table. I didn't quite hear an answer. Maybe you gave me the answer. So my question, setting aside policy, is that is public accessibility to deposit copies on the technical roadmap for your team, setting aside policy, just so that we can understand as a committee whether or not we need to be providing suggestions or input on those particular features?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question one more time? Is what feature on the roadmap?
My earlier question was, is public accessibility to deposit copies for copyright registrations on the roadmap for your team or not? Setting aside policy as to access, because if it is on the roadmap, a lot of people on this committee are going to want to provide feedback and suggestions on those types of features.
Right. So that, again, is a question that would have to go through a long rulemaking process prior to being even sort of inserted into the roadmap. Does that make sense? Right. That's not sort of on the menu at this stage for the.
That's all I was asking. That answers my question. Thanks.
Okay. And I want to say that that's not a policy commitment of one direction or another from the office. I'm not one of the attorneys in the office. I am in an IT background, but just to say that is not currently in a backlog.
Okay.
I'm not supposed to say backlog anymore. Actually, we're trying to call that a product pipeline from now on, because the word backlog is a bad word in the context of well, basically every federal bureaucracy, I think. But Jeff, did that answer your question?
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, so Scott, I'm going to get to you in just a second, but I want to hand over to Sean Gallagher for a moment to just talk about the upcoming release.
Hey, thanks, David. Appreciate it. Yeah, so we're having our second release for the copyright public record system. We did our first release back in December of last year. And since we did get some feedback through our feedback channels, we're trying to clean up some of the detailed record view as we come across some of the more interestingly recorded bits of data in the office and have those present in our new search index. So we'll be hopefully doing a little bit of searchability improvements, some UI cleanup, so restructuring some of the detailed record views to make them a little bit more understandable, as well as adding out a new feature to be able to keep track of your recent records and recent searches within a session within the browser itself. So if you're run a search and you want to rerun that again a little bit later and you still haven't been logged out due to any inactivity, you'll be able to rerun a recent search or easily go back and look at some of the recent records that you may have viewed in the public record system.
Thanks. And then go ahead, Scott.
Thank you. So I hope you'll allow me to ask a naive policy question, because I think it has pretty significant implications for implementation. Going back to the thread about privacy and security, my question is how clear are the policies around what information is by default public, what information is by default private, and where the decisions get made for any ambiguities in what is semi-public or semi-private, because there are clearly these very different user groups, right? There's an interested public, there's a set of researchers on the one side who are seeking access to large amounts of information, and on the other side, there is a very legitimate group of content creators who are seeking privacy and security, and how are those negotiated once it comes to the point of technical implementation?
Thanks, Scott. And I would say this is the area of personally identifiable information and privacy and security is a big one in federal bureaucracies. It covers policy in a wide array of. But if it's all right, I'll start by handing it over to Judith Conklin, who has helpfully gone on camera and unmuted herself, and who can start us off talking about the privacy aspects of it that intersect with IT policy.
So at the Library of Congress, for every information system that we have, we identify a business owner. We call it an information system business owner, and they make all those decisions on access to the data, what data can be seen, the categorization of the data. And so I will punt back to Copyright Office and the business part of it.
Right. So that's a good dodge there, Judith. That's good.
I will say we will secure it in any manner that the business requires us to secure it. I will state that.
So Scott, the two big beginning parts of that process that we sort of go through during the accreditation process for any IT system are the privacy threshold assessment and the privacy impact assessment. Did I get those acronyms right, Judith? PIA and PTA? Is that the those are sort of subject to the agency-wide privacy office, and we don't have those folks on the line today, but that kind of is one set of policies, and then obviously the rulemaking process is another set of policy that governs the security and on that side, and then additionally, beyond all of that, there's the actual IT security rules about the implementation of that. So it's a big, complicated area. I don't know, you've got your hand up again, if there's a clarifying or area that we could go.
Yeah, so the purpose of the question in this case for the implementation side of things things is how frictionless or frictionful access to data is that is either considered to be from policy public or private. And so the question here specifically is what goes into the decision-making process for the amount of friction that goes into access for data. And then on top of that, my sort of suggestion would be to make that as clear as possible to those users, both on the side of content creators who have a vested interest in maintaining their privacy, and also on the side of the engaged public and researchers who are trying to figure out what they actually can or ought to have access to.
Thanks for that comment. And it's really, I think the clarity of the friction is really a great comment and a great thing for us to sort of take back. I think that's a big area that it would be hard to get into in great depth in the time we have remaining. So if it's okay, I'll take your comment in and move on to the next question. Susan, I think you were the next person with your hand up.
Oh, thank you. So I wanted to ask a question about funding. I'm aware that a few years back, and I've sort of lost track of which year it was, that Congress appropriated, I believe it was $12 million a year for 5 years for this project. And I just wanted to check in, what year are we into that? And are you all anticipating that those $12 million allotments are going to cover? I mean, we've talked about that this is a sort of forever project, but are going to cover sort of the bulk of the current upgrade, or will there need to be more funding? And is that something that like copyright owners will need to be advocating for or anything like that?
Thanks, Susan. So for the questions about cost, and hopefully I think many of the people on the call have some familiarity with this part of the process, but we requested 5 years of development funding, as well as some subsequent base funding for the ongoing modernization for this, around $60 million over a 5-year period. There are additional funds dedicated to the digitization of the historic record, which are separate funds. And the office and agency have also committed a portion of base funding to the effort. So for example, you see the CIO and the deputy CIO on this. That's sort of part of agency overhead, which is also part of it. But I think the most sensible public definition of done that we can sort of pin to that gives an easy answer to this is the sort of turning off of the legacy systems. Are we going to be ready to replace these legacy systems in 2024? And that is still our goal.
And you feel like you have enough money to get to that goal right now with what you've been appropriated?
Well, I would say that's a question that I think is largely the question of to turn off the legacy systems, or I would say I would defer that question. I'm not the person probably to answer it, and I don't think we have the person on the call, but it is currently, there's no known impediments to the plan currently to turn off legacy systems in 2024. We feel like we're on target to do that. Todd, I believe, was the next person asking a question.
Sure, thanks, David. Call me a geek for procedures. In the last couple minutes that we have, it seems like we've spent 3 hours and we've dug into a tremendous amount. And I think Keith dropped something in the chat as well. It seems like a meeting every 6 months is going to be insufficient for us to dig into these details at a level that I think is going to be valuable for the office. I, for one, would be willing to meet more often than that. And I expect others in the group would as well. Do you have any sense of where we'll go from here. I mean, it seems like only twice a year is not enough. And are there ways in which, or assignments between now and the next meeting, things that we can do to help?
Well, I just want to say thank you for the energy and expertise of this group, and thank you for the willingness to even come on this sort of a marathon. You know, when we first started talking about this process, we weren't imagining that we would be still in the middle of a pandemic. So it's not sort of exactly as we imagined it in that way, but this has been, I will say, enormously valuable already, just in terms of the visibility into questions and the visibility into answers and the visibility into expertise. And I appreciate, again, the phenomenal energy. I'm seeing many of the comments from the committee members in the chat that there would be more willingness for more input. And I appreciate hearing that. I'm certainly not in a position to say sort of off the cuff to that I can change the agency's plan without further consultation, but it's a great thing to know. Pamela, and I think we'll have maybe time for one more question after Pamela's question.
Okay, I might revert from my original question, was going to be a continuation on the sort of privacy issue, which sounds like maybe it's a little more complicated from an architecture point of view. And again, trying to keep this within the technology conversation. It does seem as though right now, or in the current system, there's sort of three different silos of information: the registrations, the recordations, the sort of public records are used by three different sets of people. And if the outcome of the modernization puts all of those together in one place, then I think it naturally becomes an issue of whatever privacy controls were necessary for one silo will have to be rethought when all of this data is accessible through one portal. You know, whether that data is stored separately is probably part of the answer to that. So that's the classic, more of an observation than a question. My practical question is, from where we go now, are there sort of minutes that will be provided after this conversation, or what should we as committee members be prepared to do next?
So we're actually going to do one better than minutes for the meeting, and the actual full recording of the meeting is available. So anybody who wants to refer back to the meeting doesn't have to rely on an individual's memory of what or depiction of what happened. So the recording, and depending on the usefulness of the live transcript that we've gotten, that may be included as well. I will say the only follow-up that we have currently scheduled from the committee, you know, we came into this without full certainty of sort of what would happen and what the level of engagement would be and how this would go. And the only follow-up that we have planned already is the next meeting in 6 months, which would be in January of 2022. I'm hearing an appetite from the committee members for more. We're nearing the end of our time, and I appreciate, again, the enormous effort that people have gone to stay with this for 3 hours. And I'm cognizant as well that we're still nearly 150 participants watching watching this group in a fishbowl. I do have a couple of sort of final, if I can dig through I've got a big pile of sticky notes of the enormously helpful things that people in this group have been saying. But I just, in order to sort of complete the time today, I would just like to say that the commitment by the 13 members of the Copyright Public Modernization Committee, the staff of the Copyright Office, the staff of the Office of the Chief Information Officer, to meet here today and to share the information that we have together and to share the time that we have together today has really just been extraordinary to me. And I want to thank you for coming. We're going to conclude here in just the next couple of minutes. And I wanted to also offer that there is that the office actually has another event, another public event that's coming up on this coming Monday. So it's not we hope that this is not a this is when we think about the different ways that the Copyright Office hears from stakeholders and users and content creators. So the very next one that I'd like to talk about for just a brief minute is on Monday, July 26th at noon Eastern Standard Time. And that will be a webinar that actually deals specifically with the registration system that we've been talking about. And I think these kinds of events, the webinars specifically, are something that we do frequently, and that are another opportunity to sort of get sort of display the work that we're doing and show what we're doing. So I would hope to see, in terms of assignments, I would hope to see as many people as possible sort of coming and joining the office for the Copyright Office webinar, which again is Monday, July 26th at noon. And I'm happy to send that out to the Copyright Public Modernization Committee as a reminder via email as well. With that, we have about 30 seconds remaining of our 3-hour tour today. And I just wanted to thank everyone in the group for joining and bid you all farewell.